Good morning and happy Friday, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. Controversy in the SEC yesterday. It impacts Georgia. We'll tell you why off the top of the program. Also, one of the key figures around Georgia was in the spotlight a little bit last night, up for a big award. We got a chance to hear from him. That is on today's show. That's a lot of fun. And Jeff Sentell stops by for some UGA recruiting talk, as he has for so many Fridays now for such a long time. One of our great traditions. We'll do that. And we are in a great mood today because college baseball season begins today. Diamond Dog has got a big series this weekend. A little bit of a weather change on that because of the anticipated rain on Sunday. So we'll talk about all of that over the course of our time together. And, of course, we wish the basketball team well as they go to Oklahoma on Saturday. Either way, what a fun Friday. It is such a thrill to have you with us for DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Happy Friday, everyone. If you don't mind, whatever you're doing to listen to the show right now, some of you put it up on the big screen TV, some of you go via phone. I guess the majority of you probably via phone. Whatever device that you are using to connect with the show, I'd like for you to gather close to it just for a moment here on this Friday to begin things here today, because I want to tell you a story that you might not be aware of. Obviously, back at the beginning of this year, Georgia had its season come to an end at the hands of Ole Miss. And that was a SEC versus SEC Sugar Bowl, something we have not gotten very much. Certainly in my lifetime. I guess it did used to happen some back in the older days. But in my lifetime, that hasn't really happened. It was really interesting to see Georgia playing this big game in New Orleans, a place that Georgia's been a lot, against another SEC team who has its own history with New Orleans. Both these SEC teams about to do battle with each other. And normally, many of you have been to these games, you know, normally when you're getting ready for the big SEC showdown, it's almost like the various fan bases have to be kept apart, that the tailgates can get a little too intermingled, and sometimes that creates drama. But if you were in New Orleans, you'll tell the tale of this, I think, yourself. You didn't have a ton of that with Georgia and Ole Miss. Georgia and Ole Miss, I was walking up and down Bourbon Street, what was a very nice day on January 1st before going to the Superdome. Nice day at that point in time. Changed, of course. But prior to that, it had been a very sunny day, pleasant. And it was really interesting to see the Georgia fans and the Ole Miss fans intermixed with each other, almost sharing their pregame festivities with each other. There just wasn't a lot of bad blood there at all. And if you ask the average Georgia fan about Ole Miss, who's, by the way, also in the news, today, as you know, which we'll eventually get to. But the point is, if you ask the average Georgia fan about his feelings about Ole Miss, the average Georgia fan would probably say, actually, I don't have much of a beef with Ole Miss. For most Georgia fans my age and younger, it almost feels like these two programs don't have a lot of history with each other. And so, therefore, Georgia fans don't really hate Ole Miss, typically speaking. Georgia fans probably don't think much about Ole Miss at all. And yet, here's a story that some of you may not be aware of. While Georgia doesn't typically think a ton about Ole Miss, we do have some very interesting and compelling evidence that over the course of the last few years, Ole Miss has thought about Georgia quite a bit. And this matters, and it's very relevant for something that's going to happen for Georgia later on this season. You may remember back to November of 2023. This was a Georgia blowout win against Ole Miss on this particular night. And in the Kirby Smart era, there have been a lot of these very dominant performances. There have been a lot of those where Georgia has just overwhelmed its opponent. But given the quality of the team that was playing and the thorough nature of the beatdown, you can make a case. This is one of those games that almost gets lost to time because, as I said before, Georgia fans don't think a lot about Ole Miss. This was not a year that resulted in a national championship. A lot of the things that happened in 2023 are almost in danger of being forgotten. This was, I'm telling you right now, if you can go back and rewatch it on YouTube or something like that, this was as thorough a beatdown against a quality opponent as Georgia's almost had. It's in the category with, like, say, 65-7 in the national championship and some of the really big, molly-whoppings that Georgia has done. Georgia against Ole Miss in 2023 was certainly near the top of that list. It happened. Georgia moved on and probably didn't think much more about it. And yet the team on the other side, at that point in its history, led by Lane Kiffin, apparently they thought about it quite a bit. And this is a very big part, we're told, of the lore of Ole Miss, of how they have gotten to what they are right now, which is some form of championship contender. Near playoffs in Lane Kiffin's age, making the playoff this year, obviously led by Pete Golding. The origin story for all of this traces back apparently to when Georgia beat Ole Miss in November of 2023. A game that you may very well have forgotten about is something that they talked about quite a bit. In fact, Chris Lowe, ESPN.com, wrote a story about this. Now, there are a handful of quotes I want to try to read to you from the story to give you an idea of how significant this game was in Ole Miss deciding, is this what we want to be as a program? Let me start with a couple of from Lane Kiffin here. Once again, this is from Chris Lowe, November of 2024, looking back to a game in 2023. So Kiffin tells of this game, he says, I remember saying in the second half of that game, this will not happen again, meaning getting blown out by Georgia. And then thinking about it, the whole plane ride home, leaving Athens, going back to Oxford in November of 2023, the entire trip back, Kiffin saying, I'm thinking about how is this not going to happen again? In other words, what do we have to do to prevent this from happening again? He goes on to say in this same story, it wasn't going to be enough just to have a great running back and throw the ball for a lot of yards if you want to beat Georgia. You're going to be if you're going to be a championship caliber team, you have to beat Georgia, and you might have to beat them twice. The only way you do that is beat them at their own game in the line of scrimmage. Now, isn't that interesting? How prophetic that turned out to be. Lane Kiffin's not my favorite guy. For many of you, he may not be your favorite guy either. But what he said turned out to be prophetic. This is him telling his own story after getting blown out in 2023. We got to figure out a way to beat Georgia, and we might have to beat them twice. Well, guess what? Georgia and Ole Miss did play twice in 2025. But this is telling the story of how it came to be that Ole Miss handled Georgia easily. And if we'll say that Georgia's beatdown of Ole Miss was about as thorough as they've beaten down anybody from like a top 10 level, at least close to it, what Ole Miss did to Georgia the following year in 2024 is also about as handily as we've seen Georgia taken care of at almost any point in time in the Kirby Smart era, especially these recent years when Georgia's been of a championship caliber. And Lane Kiffin's own telling him this was, if we're going to be great, we've got to beat Georgia. What does it take to beat Georgia? You've got to be better across the lines of scrimmage. And that is something that that Ole Miss has done. Georgia has seen Ole Miss do that. Because if you look at the last couple of years, what you've seen is as much as Georgia's been dominated by anybody, almost that came at the hands of Ole Miss. And among the more heartbreaking losses that Georgia suffered, that also came at the hands of Ole Miss in the Sugar Bowl this past year. Heartbreaking loss in the playoff, dominant loss on the road in 2024, all of that the result of what Lane Kiffin said that Ole Miss decided to do in response to getting their teeth kicked in by Georgia in 2023. Keith Carter, the Ole Miss athletic director, also had some quotes in this same story by Chris Lowe. One of these really stood out to me. As Carter looks over the situation, he says, maybe it's not as much now with the way Lane has raised our program to national relevance, but it's hard to go recruit 5-star after 5-star here at Ole Miss. But when you can go get guys that are those same caliber guys in the portal, it's an equalizer. He says, we prove that our roster is as good as Georgia's. That last line, folks, really stands out, that Ole Miss believes that it has now built a roster that is equal to what Georgia's is. And Ole Miss would say they've got some evidence to back that up, because since getting blown out by Georgia in 2023, they have won 2 of the 3 meetings since then. And the one Georgia win, as you know, was a knockdown dragout that Georgia had to throw everything it had at the Rebels just to win in its own stadium. If not for a 17-0 run in the fourth quarter this past October, Georgia would have probably lost that too. So the point here is that Ole Miss said way back in 2023, we want to stop getting blown out by Georgia. We're going to try to build a roster like Georgia's. We're Ole Miss. We can't do that in high school recruiting. Therefore, we're going to do it in the portal. And we have to admit here, it worked. It did. It worked. Based on the results against Georgia, based on the national relevance that's come because of that conversation, we would have to say for Ole Miss, that worked. Ole Miss now stands as a true formidable challenger to Georgia, a true threat to Georgia. It ended your season a year ago. Ole Miss is now a very relevant team for Georgia fans to consider, and it is a significant obstacle in Georgia's way. So much so that our friends at CBS Sports, even before we got the news that we got yesterday, they were already hyping up the game this November when Georgia goes back to Vaught-Hemingway Stadium. You've already played Ole Miss 4 times in the last 3 years. You're about to play them for a 5th time coming up this November. And the folks at CBS Sports say this is the most important game that Georgia will play all season long, which is going very much against what Georgia fans have come to expect. There is a epicenter of the Georgia schedule that usually includes your yearly opponents like Florida and Auburn, and what Georgia has viewed its arch nemesis to be Alabama. But based on the results, you can make a case that Ole Miss is actually a greater thorn in your side than Alabama has been lately, and you can make a case that programs like Ole Miss and the other very transfer-heavy teams in that western portion of the SEC, they are far more aggressive than a team like Alabama, that we should probably take CBS at its word, or at least consider the strong possibility. They may be right when they say this is the most important game for Georgia. Even before we got the news we got yesterday, let me read to you from CBS Sports about this. They say there's a chance, albeit a small one, that Georgia could arrive in Oxford unbeaten and ranked number 1 in early November. The matchup between Georgia and Ole Miss could carry top 4 seed implications in the playoff race if Ole Miss is elite again under first-year coach Pete Golding. CBS goes on to say that Georgia split its meetings with the Rebels last fall, and in each game saw its secondary picked apart by Trinidad Chambliss, who is seeking an eligibility waiver at a mid-February hearing. Alabama and Florida always draw attention, but if Georgia wants another SEC title, the Bulldogs will have to get past Ole Miss. That story appearing at CBS Sports this week. And once again, I think that Georgia fans ought to take that very seriously, because that mid-February hearing that was supposed to take place, it did take place. Yesterday, Trinidad Chambliss got his day in court, and he won. People can say what they want about the decision of the judge and the efficacy of the claim. Either way, winners write the history, and Trinidad Chambliss got his eligibility. The stage is set for him to play for Ole Miss this fall. So if the Georgia-Ole Miss game appeared important before, it appears especially important now, because the guy who was Michael Jordan basically in the Sugar Bowl now gets his chance to return to the Rebels if that's what he wants to do. We believe that is what he'll want to do, and Ole Miss will certainly celebrate his return as well. And if you want to remember back to just how tough Trinidad Chambliss can be and how much of a tough customer he can be for Georgia, Kirby Smart has talked about it. This is Smart in the past, speaking about just how dangerous of an athlete Trinidad Chambliss can be.
Yeah, you said it. He's explosive, right? He's quick, he's fast, he's tough. He's got great lower body, great instincts. You know, there's a difference in being a fast guy and being a runner. He patient behind blocks, quick when he needs to be. Some guys can only run perimeter runs well. Some can only run internal well. He runs both. He does a great job in the draw game. He sets up blocks, and he's a good passer. But I mean, they should get the greatest award there is for finding this guy and having the department within. I don't know who scouted it, who found him, but he is a really good football player that they went out and got and did a tremendous job.
Yeah, what Smart says at the end there, I think, is really important in terms of how it is that Trinidad Chambliss arrived at Ole Miss to begin with. Kirby says, hey, whoever found him deserves all the credit in the world, and I think that's true, and I won't pretend to know necessarily how all that came to be. But the quote we read to you from Keith Carter, the athletic director, a moment ago, I do think sets the stage for how stuff like this happens. Ole Miss, and almost any success story individually, organizationally, whatever, begins with a moment like this. It looked itself in the mirror and said, let's be honest about who we are. And Ole Miss looked itself in the mirror and said, we are not Georgia. We are not going to go scour the country and just collect every 5-star recruit coming out of high school. The kind of organizational prowess and strength, the infrastructure required to do something like that, We don't have it. We're a smaller state. We share our state with Mississippi State. We are under-resourced and compared to Georgia, at least based on that kind of plan of attack. We're not going to be able to do that. They were honest about who they were. And then they said, okay, what can we do? Well, we can go out and do what Georgia thus far has chosen not to do. We can just simply dominate the transfer portal. And that seems like a lesser approach compared to the venerable way that recruiting's always worked, but the results speak for themselves. Ole Miss has elevated its program almost instantaneously. They go from overnight being the kind of team that may have a nice ranking, but you're pretty sure you can beat them, to the point now they're ending your season. That's how all of that changed, because Ole Miss became a transfer-oriented program, so much so that it's even looking for transfers that nobody else even heard of, such as Trinidad Chambliss, and now he is the quarterback that he is. The other thing that this story, I think, also tells is that you see Ole Miss also paying attention to another trend that's becoming more prevalent across sports. We talked about this yesterday as it relates to basketball. Programs just value older players more so than younger players. A school like Ole Miss looks at a guy like Trinidad Chambliss seeking a sixth year of eligibility in a way that would not have been true in previous eras, and they simply say, if we can get the older guy, he's just more worth the money. We got money to pay, but we would rather pay it to a guy that we're sure is worth it, the guy we've already seen in our offense, even if he's beyond the normal expectation for what a college-age athlete is. If we're going to be forced to pay millions for a quarterback, then let me pay millions for a guy that I know is worth it. We are seeing what looks to be almost not quite a market collapse for the young, inexperienced talent, but boy, there is a clear market shift towards, if I can pay a guy who's older, who I'm sure is worth it, that just seems to be where the market is moving right now. And Ole Miss seems to understand that, so much so that it's seeking to build itself one more time around Trinidad Chambliss, which obviously makes the first full season, the Pete Golding era, it's far easier to imagine Ole Miss now having success if Trinidad Chambliss truly is returning, which obviously the court decision yesterday opened the door for him to do. So to bring this back to Georgia to conclude the point, here's what I'll say. I think the Georgia fans should listen to what the media is telling you right now. Your game against Ole Miss is huge. Ole Miss, by almost being the opposite of Georgia, has made itself the kind of program who's currently having success that rivals Georgia. Ole Miss finished the past year ranked higher than UGA. It played deeper into the college football playoff. And that means as Georgia fans begin to look at what the 2026 schedule is going to look like, looking a little closer at Oxford, Mississippi, and viewing a program that at one point in time you didn't think you had much history with, over the last couple of years, you've established a lot of history against these Rebels. And Ole Miss has used Georgia as its bullseye for what it wants to be as a program. And it has made the necessary changes to make itself more competitive, and for the most part, it has worked. So it's time in 2026 for Georgia to get some retribution. It's time in 2026 for Georgia to take Ole Miss every bit as seriously as Ole Miss takes it, going into Oxford and getting that big win. And if it can do that, then as CBS said, maybe a third straight SEC championship, and possibly a lot more than that, could be well on the way if the Dogs can take care of business with Trinidad Chambliss returning now for these Rebels. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. We are glad you were with us. Hope you're getting ready for a great weekend, whatever that might entail for you. Just really, really thrilled, though, that you started off with us here today. Man, that means the world to me. I am so thankful for that. And as a return for your generosity of spending some time with me, let me give you a way how you can get more convenience in your life and save a little bit of money, too. Our friends at Kroger make that possible. Right now, you can try Kroger Boost for free for 30 days, and I think you should, because if you're like me, I say this all the time, you wouldn't believe all the things that we're just doing. Driving this kid here, this kid there, and that. A lot of trips around the sun for us, it feels like these days. And that means a lot of, trips to the pump to refuel. And anything you can do to save at the pump, well, of course, that's a smart thing to do. Kroger gives you a chance to do that on the stuff that you're already buying at Kroger. You typically earn a fuel point for every dollar you spend, but as a Kroger Boost member, you get twice that. 2 fuel points for every dollar spent at Kroger on the stuff that you're already buying anyway. What a great savings opportunity that is. And how about convenience? As a Kroger Boost member, free grocery delivery, free grocery pickup, all of this included with your Kroger Boost membership Man, that's an amazing opportunity as well. One of the reasons why you ought to try Kroger Boost. Online, Kroger.com/boost for more on that today. That is Kroger.com/boost for more on that today. By the way, speaking of Kroger, I will remind you that today is your last day for the Dog Nation Cruise. We'll talk more about that excuse me. Let me see if I can speak English. We will talk more about that a little bit later on the show, but just keep that in mind. Today is the deadline. You got to get in there and get involved with all of that. We've also got Jeff Sentell coming up in a moment, some UGA recruiting talk with Jeff. That should be a lot of fun. A lot going on, it would seem, with Georgia and its 2027 class. And Jeff will give us all the details on that coming up in a moment. Prior to that, though, let's go around the doghouse, presented today by our friends at Zagoria Law. And we're obviously moving into the 2026 calendar, getting ready for the 2026 season this fall, but there are still some leftover remnants from 2025 that are still taking place, including last night in Hot Springs, Arkansas. Now, I got to tell you, another SEC state that Georgia fans don't feel like they have much history with. I'm a big fan of the state of Arkansas. I just think it's a cool state. Northwest Arkansas, where Fayetteville's located, really pretty. Obviously, a lot of outdoor activities. You've also got not turn this into an Arkansas commercial, but you've got Oaklawn, and you've got you're not too far from the big resort up there, Lake of the you just got some nice stuff going on. And one of the things that the state of Arkansas has always done really well is the legendary former Arkansas coach Frank Broyles obviously celebrated his legacy by the Broyles Award, which is given out every year in the state of Arkansas to the nation's top assistant. Last night, Mike Bobo was one of the finalists for that award, did not win. The guy from Indiana ended up winning, but Mike Bobo was a finalist and was presented on stage celebrating the success that he's had at Georgia. Got a chance to be interviewed by Holly Rowe there on the platform. The Broyles Award folks put this up on YouTube. I'll give you a couple of clips here. First of all, Holly was fascinated by the backstory involving Mike Bobo and his quarterback, Gunner Stockton, and how long Gunner had known the Bobo family, how this was tied into Kirby Smart's family, a really interesting overlap between the Smart, Stockton, and Bobo families. Mike Bobo talking about that last night. Interesting to see Mike getting the spotlight that he did. The Broyles Award folks do a great job with this. Here is Mike Bobo telling Holly Rowe about just how intertwined those three families have been. Here is Mike Bobo on that.
It's kind of surreal. My dad was my high school coach, and I go to the University of Georgia. He ends up retiring from being a head coach in a town in South Georgia, Thomasville, and goes and works for a guy up in Rabun County, Sonny Smart, Kirby Smart's dad. And in that town was a young Gunner Stockton, who was a little kid and would come around the field house of Rabun County and grew up and wanted to be a quarterback. And my dad was there and, kind of took him under his wing and kind of helped train him early on. My dad does not deserve all the credit or does not want all the credit. Gunner is who he is because he's an unbelievable family, how he works, he's toughness, he's selfless, he's humble, just a joy to coach.
I would invite you to go online and you can watch the entire interview that Holly did with Mike Bobo, this at the end of a near 3-hour broadcast. But nonetheless, you can go find that. And, Mike got into a lot of different things. Obviously, he references his father there, George Bobo, and talk about Sonny Smart and Sonny's ties to the, Rabun County area where Gunner grew up. And it's pretty interesting to hear in the midst of all of this, the respect that Mike Bobo has for the way in which Georgia high school football has helped make him who he is. And for someone like me who really loves Georgia high school football, it's nice to hear just how, the word high school came up a lot with Mike Bobo in this interview last night as he was, honored as one of the finalists for the Broyles Award, and how he was shaped by his time in high school and his father's long, lineage as a high school coach and legacy there. And it is interesting to hear that story of, okay, well, Sonny Smart's up there, and George Bobo is going up there to be with him, and then George gets to know the Stockton family, and we obviously know that Gunner had this dream of playing for Georgia. His family had been a long time. I'm talking about really, really, really intense Georgia supporters. But then Mike Bobo's offensive coordinator at South Carolina. It seems like Gunner might go there. And then, Mike ends up at Auburn, and, who knows what's going to happen. And somehow everybody now all reunited at Georgia and, frankly, having great success. Georgia won the SEC last year. Stockton was one of the top 10 Heisman finalists, and the offense was really humming along for the most part last year. So these three families that I guess got to know each other around this time, now all getting the chance to work together now at Georgia. It is a really amazing story, and it's a lot of fun. And it's not the only family-oriented aspect of what Mike Bobo has going on at Georgia. Another thing that Holly Rowe was fascinated about and asked him about last night as a part of the Broyles Award ceremony is the fact that as a coach, he also gets to coach his son, Drew, who, while this did not really come up in the interview, we are hoping is on his way back to full health after an injury took him off the field at the end of last season. But Mike Bobo told Holly Rowe last night a little bit about how he feels about the great privilege and pleasure. You can only imagine how much fun this must be to get a chance to coach his own son right now. This is Mike Bobo again from the Broyles Award ceremony, talking about coaching his own son, Drew, the starting center for Georgia.
We're so proud of Drew. Drew was which most linemen are, but he was not as Coach was talking about, he wasn't a 4 or 5 star. He was a developmental guy coming out of high school. And, I want him to go to a program. I wasn't at the University of Georgia at the time, but go to a program where there was going to be a standard and accountability. And that's what Kirby Smart is about. And have an opportunity for him to go to the University of Georgia and play for Kirby Smart. Laney and I both graduated from the University of Georgia. To be in that program, we knew he was going to grow. And then fortunately I got on the staff and have a chance to coach him, but we're so proud of how hard he worked, how he represents the University of Georgia and represents our family name.
I don't think it's out of bounds to say that when Drew Bobo came to Georgia, I think a lot of people just thought, oh, this is Mike Bobo's son. I guess he's going to be here at UGA. I don't think people, I'll confess that I was probably this way. I didn't have reason to think he wasn't a good football player, but I don't think I had him penciled in as a bedrock member of Georgia's offensive line, which, make no mistake about it, Drew Bobo has emerged, when healthy, as a bedrock member of Georgia's offensive line. He's one of the best centers in the country. And, Georgia has typically had stellar center play. It's one of the reasons why the offense, when successful, has hummed along as well as it has. And Drew Bobo has turned out to be an outstanding player. And really, you're lucky to have him. It's almost one of these things that just kind of fell in your lap because I guess he's Mike Bobo's son. And that's, Mike says, even before being in Georgia, I wanted to be at a place like Georgia. Well, as it turns out, Drew Bobo is among the most important players for Georgia in its 2026 roster. In fact, the other day, when I think it was On3, had their way too early top 100 player list for the upcoming season. The highest ranked Georgia player on the list was Drew Bobo, coming in at number 57, to give you an idea of how important he is overall. And, oh yeah, by the way, before we wrap this up, there was a little bit of breaking news last night. In the discussion that Mike Bobo was having, he let it be known that his other son, Jake Bobo, who had played at Prince Avenue and spent this past year, I think it was at Samford, S-A-M-F-O-R-D. I think it was at Samford. I believe that's where Jake Bobo was. Jake Bobo is now on the roster at Georgia here this year too. Jake had been a part-time quarterback at Prince Avenue. He also played like some fullback and some things like that. So in many ways, he is just like a football player. Played some quarterback, but really just kind of a football player. Had been at Samford and I guess now at Georgia. So another Bobo now at UGA, according to Mike last night. Jake Bobo, Drew's brother, one of Mike Bobo's sons, now at UGA as well. But either way, last night, Mike Bobo honored as one of the finalists for the Broyles Award. Did not win the award, but he had a spotlight on him, and a lot of that turned into the real family affair that Georgia is and the family-oriented atmosphere that has been such a bedrock foundational principle for this program's success. And that is Around the Doghouse, and it's presented today by our friends at Zagoria Law. Now, speaking about family, one of the things that you want is to protect your family. And listen, that means all kinds of potential danger, and one of the things that is a real thing that sometimes happens, dog bites, dog-related injuries. And in almost any situation like this, you're going to usually trace the story back on this to negligence on the part of that dog owner. Dog just not taking proper care of the animal. Animal gets free, gets loose, and oftentimes, havoc can ensue. People can get hurt. People can get bitten. If that's your story or the story of someone you love, we think you deserve your chance to fight for compensation like any other personal injury situation. So my advice to you would be to check out online ZagoriaLaw.com, ZAGORIA, that's ZagoriaLaw.com, or give them a call, 833-GA-DOG-BITE, dog spelled conventionally D-O-G, 833-GA-DOG-BITE. These are the lawyers that literally wrote the book on how to win this kind of case. They're experts in how personal injury law specifically is impacted by these dog bite situations. So if that's you, someone you love, you've been hurt, you've been injured by a dog, our friends at Zagoria Law can fight for you and perhaps get you the compensation that you deserve. So one more time, 833-GA-DOG-BITE or online, ZagoriaLaw.com. Okay, before we're done, NCAA lost yesterday, seemingly pretty badly, in the local court for Trinidad Chambliss. Now the NCAA apparently back in court again today for another SEC quarterback. What's the outlook for that? We'll talk about that here in a moment. But for now, on everything going on with UGA recruiting, it is a Friday staple around here. Let's talk to Jeff Sentell on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
How about this? Jeff Sentell, throwback to Indianapolis. Boy, I tell you what, man, that's a good memory. He's got the national championship stocking cap on there. He's up in the cold weather area. Quite a backdrop for you, Jeff. Now, it's been snowy like that in Georgia seemingly every weekend for the last, as long as I can remember, but you are apparently not in Georgia today. Would you like to reveal some details about who you are and what you got going on?
Hey, Brandon. Hey, good morning, man. It looks like this is what it should have looked like, I guess, when I joined you from Norway last year, right?
Yes, that's exactly right.
I'm in Western Pennsylvania. I've been here for the last couple of days. So, dog fans, let's do a quick engagement trick over the interwebs right now. Why would Jeff be in Western Pennsylvania, about 45 miles outside of Pittsburgh? I'll give you a couple of seconds to weigh in, but I'll let Brandon tell you where I'm at. Of course. Where would I be?
The big reveal got messed up by the camera falling over. That's always
there we go, live TV. That's what it is.
Yeah, listen. So fill folks in with the details. A very special recruit you've had the chance to speak to here. Share more of those details with us if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. Sorry about that. That was all part of the script to add some time for everybody to weigh in.
I like it.
5-star running back, Keemon Spell. I spent yesterday with him. I'm up here in Pittsburgh, going back to Atlanta today. Of course, you got to get home for Valentine's Day. But, Brendan, we got a chance to sit down, got a chance to watch him work out. I showed you that snow, Brandon. In some spots here, it's probably 15 to 20 inches. But they just do things differently here. The roads are bone dry. The snow is all pushed up into like mini mountains that have now been, kind of charcoal colored with soot and exhaust fumes and everything else like that. But man, Brandon, we learned a lot about Keemon Spell. And, one of the big things we came up here to do was we wanted to kick the tires on the strength of his Georgia football commitment. And we got a lot to tell you about that.
Yeah, look forward to reading that there at DawgNation.com. I guess I'm curious of this. What's his personality like? How do you find him? For Georgia fans who obviously know the credentials and they've seen the film, and my gosh, it's certainly impressive. What is the young man like?
Well, first of all, Brandon, when you see him, sometimes film doesn't do it justice. And you got to remind yourselves that he'll be 17 in April, Brandon. And the first thing that strikes you is really his lower half. It is built differently. I believe he's like 212, 213 right now. And he is a guy that really looks put together. You think about him and what he did last year, Brandon, speaking to him as a person, he's a very motivated young man. He is one of 11 siblings, Brandon. And he's somewhere in the middle. I just can't imagine what it's like growing up in a household with 11 siblings. And, he's a guy that's very hungry. His dream is to go play for the Dallas Cowboys one day. But his dream right now is to go finish out his senior year, winning that elusive state championship for the McKeesport High School Tigers. They haven't won one of those since 2005, I believe. And, Brandon, I don't mind sharing a little bit because these are all information sources on different platforms, but he shared a definition of the word committed where he said committed. And that means not visiting any other schools. And that means only visiting Georgia from here on in.
Really interesting. Let me use that to move on to this, which is, okay, so he's a running back commit for Georgia, and obviously the prize commit in the class right now. Noah Parker's running back commit from Georgia. We also saw some news this week, though, with Andrew Beard, who I think has been well known to people like me for a while. Yeah, listen, I'm always, somewhat in the tank for guys that I've seen on TV a good bit, and Beard is certainly one of those. He's got some visits coming up. He's got, a list of finalists that are coming out here. Georgia's still in the mix, but also getting a push from the Clemsons of the world, teams like that. How much, how involved can Georgia be with a guy like Andrew Beard, who obviously has the family tie because of being the nephew of Garrison Hurst, while also having commits from two different running backs right now, highly rated in the case of Kimon Spell?
Yeah, Brandon, that's a good question because, listen, if you would have asked me a month ago, I would have said put a lot more chips onto the side of Georgia and eventually signing Andrew Beard than Kimon Spell. And now that is totally reversed. Part of that is listening to Kimon speak this week and also just seeing the conviction he speaks in his mind and with all of his candid thoughts about Georgia. But the other side of that is, Andrew Beard has felt like a greater priority to one school, and that's Tennessee. Georgia's in its top four. Georgia's always going to be one of those in-game schools for Andrew Beard, but it sounds like Tennessee is his leader. Georgia's in the top four. Georgia might be second or third. And Brandon, honesty compels me to admit that if you're a top 6, top 7 running back in the country, and the number 1 running back in the country is already committed to Georgia, along with another running back as well, that 3-dog night for some big SEC football games doesn't really sound as compelling as Tennessee telling you you're their guy, or you're one of their 2 guys and they have a specific plan for using you. Do I think it's over? No, but I think the chances of Georgia, maybe sitting with these 2 running backs or finding another one, they've definitely gone up, especially when you combine Spell's conviction to Georgia and now how Andrew Beard feels about the Tennessee Volunteers. Georgia is among his top 4.
There was other recruiting chatter the last few days that I thought was interesting, too. Last year, obviously, there's the big drama involving Mark Bowman, who Georgia would have loved to have had, and a lot of times you think, well, that's the kind of player that should end up at Georgia. USC paid $8 gazillion for him. I guess LSU tried to pay $8 gazillion for him too. Ultimately didn't work out. Well, now the prize tight end recruit for this cycle appears to be Brock Williams, and there has been some positive chatter as of late between George and Williams. This has been going on for the last few days. What do you make of that? How realistic do you think it could be for George and Brock Williams, who I believe was at Junior Day, if I have this right? Correct me if I'm wrong. A couple of weekends ago. How real do you think it is for Georgia and Brock Williams right now?
Brennan, I think it's really real. And, perhaps one of the best ways we can discuss this is we can talk about Kimon Spell. I asked him, who are the guys that he wants to bring to the class? And he absolutely said Brock Williams is one of his top targets. And Brandon, I don't know how many of our viewers and audience knows this, but those 2 guys play on the same 7-on-7 team. So they've seen each other at Georgia 2 weekends ago. They were in Las Vegas together just this past weekend. Now, the intriguing part with Brock Williams is he is only going to take one official visit, and that's the school he will eventually commit to, probably sometime around in March, between Georgia, Ohio State, and Texas. And it used to be, Brandon, it was kind of very much like a stakes race, like the old Belmont or Kentucky Derby, where at one point it was Georgia, and then it became Ohio State. That's the school he visited twice last year. And then now you have, Georgia kind of gaining some real momentum. And obviously Texas is in there. Texas got a recent visit as well. But Brock Williams is feeling like he's taken all of his visits before decision time, and he only wants to take one official visit. He doesn't want to waste any other school's time with, the whole dog and pony show, putting on the uniforms, the photo shoots, and everything else like that. And when I spoke to Kimon Spell about Brock Williams yesterday, Brandon, he was smiling.
Speaking of guys that Georgia has some momentum with, this is a story you wrote at DawgNation.com that I thought was really interesting. Gigantic offensive tackle prospect, Joshua Sam-Appel from Douglas County. That's another guy we featured on TV numerous times on Atlanta News First with our friends from Score Atlanta. And based on your story, based on the chatter that exists out there, this seems pretty real here. Georgia needs that elite tackle prospect, and it seems like they have a pretty good toehold right now when it comes to Sam-Appel, do they not?
Well, it's kind of contested as it can be, Brandon, because here's what we know. We know that the offensive tackle position is a premium monopoly money type position. And what I mean by that is it's that corner around Boardwalk, around Park Place, where if you looked at the top 10 offensive tackle signees of a year ago, Brandon, there was only one school getting one each of that top 10. You can't monopolize that board for offensive tackles anymore. We have two cases of offensive tackles. I think Georgia's ideal close, they have Kelsey Adams, and they would love to add Joshua Sam-Appel. Well, there's a not so fast here. Number one, Kelsey Adams is committed, but he's going to take a lot of visits. LSU is coming hard because LSU wants one of those top 10 tackles as well. Now, Joshua Sam-Appel tells me that Ole Miss is in there now. Tennessee is in there now. Miami is in there now. Those are the schools that he's hearing a lot from right now, along with Georgia. Georgia has kind of maintained his level, Brandon, but this is a young man that probably could have pulled the trigger about 2 or 3 times already, but he's waiting. He's keeping his recruitment open. And one of the things he's heard from college coaches is they see his great first-round NFL potential, but they also still see a rawness at the position, and they wouldn't mind him kind of coming in and learning his way and not being thrust into there to play right away. And he's been receptive to that.
So let me tell you my theory, and you tell me if this is wrong, or you can tell me if you really do believe me, because obviously, I probably have a tendency to zigzag on some of this. I honestly believe that as a Georgia fan and a guy that loves following Georgia recruiting, I think I would be okay if in future years, if Georgia's recruiting class rankings started to fall. Like, I think even this year we made a big deal about it not being as elite as previous classes. It's still, top 4? I mean, it's still up there near the top. But I think I would be okay is if it really did start to fall a little bit. Georgia signs fewer guys, maybe fewer blue chip guys. I think I'd be okay with that if there was a priority on the elite offensive tackle and in some cases the elite defensive lineman. The positions that you really can't get out of the transfer portal, marshaling resources in those two directions, lines of scrimmage, the kind of thing. Because, listen, Jordan Seaton is the exception that proves the rule. You are not getting elite offensive tackle from the transfer portal. You're just not. Defensive line is almost just as hard. So, therefore, get those guys out of high school, put a lot of resources to it, which means you've got less budget for other players, less budget for other elite players, but let me get out of high school and prioritize out of high school what I can only get out of high school. And maybe some of the other positions, I'll be a little okay shopping in the portal market to see what's there. Whether George would ever do that or not, what do you think of that as an overall strategy?
Yeah, Brennan, I think the main thing is you just can't go and get all those elite guys. You can't hoard them anymore. I think the new normal right now is Georgia will probably end up with no more than 2 or 3 5-stars a cycle. Let me tell you what I see kind of coming down the track with all that, buddy. And that is, it's kind of going to be like an off and on situation. What I mean by that is, let's say Georgia identifies it has a need at offensive tackle in this cycle. Well, then they go hard for one premium elite prospect. And that's got to kind of be their guy for a little bit. And then you have, when it comes to the spend at the offensive tackle position, maybe the next year is not the high school spend. It is one of two things. It is either the transfer portal spend, like you just described there, or it is the retain our current guys spend. And I'm talking about perhaps like we saw with Juan Gaston. Juan Gaston came to Georgia for a certain sum, and then he exceeded that worth of that first initial agreement, and he got a raise for year 2 or year 3. I think that's what you're going to have. You're going to have alternate spending at certain positions. And let's say this year is the offensive tackle spend. Next year, Georgia has to prioritize perhaps cornerback, perhaps running back, perhaps wide receiver. Brandon, we saw Georgia spend a lot more than they ever had at wide receiver in the 2025 class. And they kind of backed off in the 2026 class a little bit at that position. So they're going to kind of fill up the bushel basket in one cycle at one specific spot, and then they're going to have to spread the wealth with another position group or two in the next cycle.
All right, let me finish with this. Georgia's going after a guy named Jaden Aparicio-Bailey, four-star defensive back out of Alabama. By the way, we've seen trips to Alabama before for recruits. Not always a fruitful endeavor, but putting that aside, Aparicio-Bailey looks like a really interesting prospect. And yet your story at DawgNation.com has gotten a lot of attention because it includes a picture of Kirby Smart holding a baby. And it reminds me of, and I think we joked about this in one of our morning meetings earlier this week, there's this AI Facebook slop where like, Kirby finds like a child on the side of the road and he's nestling it close to him. Like this is an actual real picture that's sort of an art imitates life type thing compared to the AI slop that I guess also exists out there. So, and first of all, Kirby looks, I would say we're watching the video, or I should say we're looking at the photo on the screen right now. Kirby looks pretty comfortable with the baby here. I do have to, give him credit for that. I mean, not necessarily a nursemaid necessarily, but he looks He looks pretty comfortable here. Tell us the backstory here. How did it come that the recruiting of Aparicio-Bailey would call upon Kirby Smart to hold a baby?
Brandon, we got a lot to talk about with Aparicio-Bailey right there. First of all, he's another 7-on-7 teammate of Keymon Spell, and Keymon Spell really wants him to be a dog as well. He's already working on him. He's not going to have far to go because Jaden Aparicio-Bailey already tells me Georgia is his leader. He's taken 5 visits to Athens already. Now, I agree with you, Brennan. It looks like one of those deep fake AIs with them trying to get Kirby finding a baby. Perhaps that real, actual, legitimate picture is going to become one of those stories about Kirby Smart finding a baby on the side of the road and delivering it to a recruit's family or something like that. But I tell you what he looked like, Brandon. And I think this is the great way to talk about this by speaking among football people. And that is Kirby looked about as rusty holding that baby as Phillip Rivers did playing quarterback. Took him a minute to kind of knock off the rust a little bit, but then he had the game time and he had the seat time and he had the reps to make it look pretty comfortable.
Yeah, when you come to running back, like say ball security, how would you judge Kirby's ball security there? He's got both hands interlocked underneath. Seems like the baby's pretty secure. I mean, he's got a smile on his face. He does not seem too uncomfortable. I mean, listen, I have not held a child since my children were about that size, so I'm not saying I'd look any better. I'd say overall, if we're grading on a pass-fail basis, I think, and if you're not watching a video, you obviously don't see this, but I think overall Kirby passes the test. I mean, he's certainly not – you can always tell somebody that has no comfort with the baby, and by the way, you see Dabo there too. You can always tell somebody that has no comfort with the baby because they hold the baby away from their body. Well, Kirby's not really doing that. So, I mean – to me, I've seen a lot of guys holding a baby in a far more awkward position than what Kirby's choosing to do right there.
Brandon, it's funny. Does he have the 5 points of contact like he's a running back going through the line? I don't think so, but he's got.
I will say this: Dabo looks more. I will say that Dabo looks more comfortable. Kirby looks okay, but admittedly, I do think that if we're judging this on the basis of who's holding the baby better, Dabo is holding the baby better than Kirby is.
All right, Brandon, let me give you some context on that one.
Okay.
This is a funny situation because Dabo held it first, and Dabo looks like he is in a deadly area right there with the hand kind of underneath the bottom. What I mean deadly is like sometimes there's some mystery foreign objects that are down there at the bottom of that diaper. Kirby's got it kind of swaddled. He's got it kind of cradled. I thought it was pretty funny. Dabo got to hold the baby first, and then what happened was when Kirby Smart visited Prattville High School in Alabama, one of the Georgia Nichols coaches texted Jaden Aparicio-Bailey and says, "Man, you can't have Kirby leave without him taking a picture of the baby. You absolutely got to get that picture with Kirby and the baby." And what Kirby had to do, man, is he had to take the baby kind of out of the stroller, out of the car seat.
Did he?
And have the baby was asleep, and he had to bring him up there. So I think that nervousness on Kirby Smart's face was that I'm not going to try and wake this kid up whereas maybe Dabo got to deal with him when he was already awake.
That's a fair point. So, in politics for a long time, this saying's been when you're on the campaign, you're shaking hands and kissing babies, which you got to be careful. It's not, shaking babies and kissing hands. It's a very different thing. Yeah. But the point is, I guess in this particular case, recruiting is now very similar, where you're out there kissing babies, just like the politicians have been doing for a while. But whatever it takes to bring home the recruit, you got to do that. Jeff, great stuff. We really appreciate your coverage up there in the Keystone State for Mr. Spell. Can't wait to read more about that from you at DawgNation.com. Be safe with your travels, and of course we'll look forward to speaking to you again very soon here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger.
Brandon, man, I appreciate it, man. Thanks for the time. Always good being on, and I can't promise you all the backdrops are going to be this interactive and fun as this one.
Well, listen, it's enjoyable for today, so I appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thanks, man. Have a great weekend.
You too.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. Like when somebody has a baby that they can just tell they've either A, never held a baby, or B, don't want to hold a baby. Yeah, they're kind of holding it like this. Kirby's at least kind of bringing it a little close. I mean, like the one thing that you learn when you are a parent is, and listen, you got to be careful. Don't take this as mean something that doesn't. But when you actually have your own children, you realize that babies are not as fragile as you think they are. Babies got a little, they got a little resiliency to them. They got to be careful with their heads and stuff. But generally speaking, they're not made of porcelain, right? I mean, they're a little more sturdy than you think they are. And if you don't hold a whole lot of babies, you're just not quite so sure. Just kind of holding it out here like this. Kirby's at least more comfortable than that. Either way, we'll get ready for our SEC Through here coming up in just a moment. Let me remind you, though, that today is February 13th. And I have been mentioning, it's Friday the 13th for those of you who are into that kind of thing. And I've been mentioning this now for quite some time, which is that today is the deadline to get in for your chance to win your way onto the DawgNation Cruise. You already know the details by now. April 20th through the 24th, we're back on Utopia of the Seas again, leaving out of Port Canaveral. I think about that as my kind of home away from home. I love being in Port Canaveral. I just love the area. We call it the Space Coast, I guess. It's gorgeous down there. Just a wonderful, wonderful place, and it's a great place to get on board Utopia of the Seas, heading our way to the DawgNation Cruise. That means a day in Nassau. And by the way, Nassau this year, unlike anything ever before, we're excited about that. Of course, Private Island, always enjoy that chance to visit that. I just love being in the Bahamas. I love looking around, seeing the tranquil waters and the gorgeous weather, especially during the spring. Just a great time to go. We just love all of that. With the hundreds of Georgia fans we get a chance to celebrate with on our DawgNation Cruise. And I'm always impressed by the fact that Kroger just wants to step in here and say, how about we also give away a trip for two on board this DawgNation Cruise? And I just think that's such a cool thing to do, and that is what Kroger is offering you your chance of right now. You have your chance to win your way onto the DawgNation Cruise. Now, here's what the prize package includes. How about a hotel room in Port Canaveral the night before the DawgNation Cruise, a stateroom for two for 4 nights on board Utopia of the Seas, how about onboard credit to enjoy while you're on Utopia of the Seas, and a gift card to help you get down to Port Canaveral and making that more convenient for you. All of that an incredible price package, all made available by our friends at Kroger's. All you got to do, go to DawgNation.com/contests, register for your chance to win there. DawgNation.com/contest. We're also going to ask you, in 10 years of Kirby Smart at Georgia, what's your favorite moment of the Kirby Smart era? Just ask you that question. You can give us an answer, and you could be in for your chance to win. And by the way, if you want to check out the rules, things like that, you can find that online as well. One more time, it's DawgNation.com/contest. Literally, today is your last day to enter. I hope you'll do that. All right, let's get ready to go SEC Through here right now. So we started the show today by talking about Trinidad Chambliss and his lawyers beating the NCAA in court yesterday. So much so that the story goes, after a long, rambling dissertation from the judge, the NCAA actually wasn't even in the room to hear the ruling read. They were that certain they were going to lose. Some of that is obviously grandstanding, their way of saying this was a fixed situation. The local judge, the Ole Miss grad, ruling against us. But nonetheless, that is what went down. And now it sets the stage for Joey Aguilar. Aguilar, unlike Trinidad Chambliss, who was only seeking a 6 year of eligibility, Aguilar is basically seeking, an 8th year of eligibility? He was part of the class of 2019, which is crazy to think. Some would say that based on the fact that Chambliss won his deal, that maybe Aguilar is also set up to win his deal too. But the truth is, and I do get the frustration on this, is that for those of us who are not lawyers, when we hear about these eligibility battles, we hear about, Diego Pavia, and then Charles Bediako, and then Trinidad Chambliss, and then Joey Aguilar. And all of these seem somewhat similar in the fact that they're all about players either seeking a return to college after, they chose to exit, or an extension of their, college career. Either way, it's, give me the permission to be somewhat non-traditional in my playing experience. And it seems like the courts themselves are fairly arbitrary on their rulings. Sometimes it's a yes, sometimes it's a no. Geography seems to play a role in some of this, at least according to some, that's where the situation is. And today, the NCAA, which has won some of these, although it did not win the Chambliss yesterday, will try to do the same thing with Joey Aguilar. The one thing I wish is I always believe the NCAA could have fought everything as vehemently as it has fought this, that when the tide turned, and I know I'm oversimplifying it, I realize this, but to keep it simple for all of us, when the tide turned on college athletics, and the tide did turn. Look, we have a 130-year history of major college athletics. A few years ago, out of nowhere, a handful of judges decided, actually, this doesn't need to exist anymore in the form that it's always existed. All of this was a fairly strong about face from what the accepted norms have been for more than a century prior to that. One day, the tide of, and I hate to say like elite because that has such a loaded, connotation to it, but elite thought, very well-educated people who live in very big cities, mostly in the Northeast Corridor, that category of thinker one day decided college athletics as we've known it, this amateur endeavor, that should not be. And at that point, boom, every major court ruling went against the NCAA. And once that tide turned and they started losing in court, their willingness to fight on behalf of themselves, I think it just kind of went away. We're told, well, college athletes must be paid. And I mean, I'm not necessarily against college athletes being paid. Can't help but notice right now, many of you are watching the Winter Olympics. Those athletes don't really get paid for participating in the Olympics, and the Olympics are a multi-billion-dollar TV endeavor the same way college athletics is. The idea that it's just a cut and dry, obvious thing, well, of course you've got to get paid. Olympic athletes don't really get paid. If you win a gold medal for the United States in the Olympics, you get like a $35,000 bonus. I mean, it's just, it's one of those things that doesn't seem to be questioned the same degree to which college athletics has been questioned. But now the NCAA wants to fight. And now that they do want to fight, they're actually winning some of these battles. They won the battle against Charles Bediako. I do believe the NCAA could have fought on its own behalf far sooner than it chose to. I think once it felt public tide, especially the kinds of people they think of themselves as intermingling with, the really well-educated, big city types. I think once they felt like the tide was turning against them in that space, I think they lost their will to fight, and everything that has happened since then has been a result of that. But admittedly, I'm probably over simplifying it. Either way, we'll find out what happens next with Charles Bediako. Interesting discussion also going on when it comes to the future of non-conference schedules. So there are a lot of SEC teams that have a lot of these big non-conference series slated to take place. Many of these signed a couple of years ago. Most of them were destined to take place several years in the future. And now, given some changes in college athletics, a lot of these are being canceled. I guess it's not official yet, but it looks like Alabama is going to cancel a future series against Ohio State. Georgia, I believe, is also in the process of coming to an agreement with all of its non-conference, other than Georgia Tech, all of its non-conference series, mostly just saying it's just not in our best interest to play this anymore. And it is interesting to see some criticism coming of Alabama because they're the one that's making this decision now. And it's interesting to see some of that criticism coming from the part of the country that I think of as the sort of Big Ten part of the country. And what is very, very annoying about that is that you can't help but notice in this run of national championships for the Big Ten, Indiana, Ohio State, Michigan, that none of those teams played a Power Four non-conference opponent in the year in which it won the national championship. And somehow down here in the SEC, we're not supposed to notice that. And I'll tell you this. One of the most aggravating things for me as a Georgia fan, this is one of those things, I always get frustrated by stuff that only I seem to care about, because at a certain point in time, someone like me who tries to be self-aware, I look at the mirror, I'm like, am I crazy? And the answer to that may be yes. But the thing as a Georgia fan that I really have been bothered by so much the last few years is that among the most impressive things that Georgia's done, Georgia's just got no credit for at all. Have y'all noticed, and obviously, technically speaking, it would have come to an end in the Sugar Bowl, 2 seasons ago, but the run that Georgia went on against non-conference opponents, if you want to trace it back to, so Georgia loses to Texas in the Sugar Bowl in 2018. Come back the next year, you go on a run where you beat Notre Dame, you beat Baylor in that year's Sugar Bowl, you beat Cincinnati, who was a top 10 team, in the next year's Peach Bowl, and then after that, you really crank it up. So Georgia goes into Charlotte to begin the 2021 season against Clemson, who was a point spread favorite that day, who had been in a half dozen playoffs in a row, won 2 national championships, and when Georgia got that win against Clemson, it unlocked a run against non-conference opponents that, so help me, has always just driven me crazy that Georgia never got credit for it, because against ranked non-conference teams, Georgia went on a stretch for the most part where it wasn't just winning these games, it was obliterating these opponents. Think about Michigan in the Orange Bowl. We joked about that on our cool down with R.S. Andrews earlier this week. Michigan folks thought they were going to win that game, and Georgia ran them out of the stadium. Following year, 2022, people forget this. Georgia played Oregon Dan Lanning in Oregon to begin the 2022 season. Georgia beat them 49-3. You never heard a word about that after that. It was just sort of accepted as a thing that happened. Nobody ever gave Georgia a lick of credit for that. Then they go, and the one close game was against Ohio State, but that's still Ohio State. National championship 65-7. 2023, obviously, people say, well, it wasn't the same level of opponent, but they beat Florida State 66-3. 2024, play Clemson to open the season, beat them 34-3. You've got this run where Georgia against ranked non-conference opponents is winning by an average of about 3 touchdowns. And at no point in time, whether it be deliberations of the selection committee or the media evaluating the selection committee, talking about Georgia, at no point in time did anybody ever notice, my gosh, when Georgia plays a non-SEC team, man, they just run them out of the stadium. Georgia never got, I know I'm coming across as, a fan here, but the truth is like, as a fan, this drives me crazy. Georgia never got an ounce of credit for winning any of these games. And then suddenly Georgia dares lose one with a first-time starting quarterback making his first ever start. They dare lose Notre Dame, and then that's all you heard about. One loss proved everything, whereas, a dozen wins prior to that seemingly proved nothing. So my advice would be, even though the non-conference games are some of my favorite stuff about college football, my advice to the SEC on behalf of someone who's watched Georgia go through this, my advice would be stop playing these games, because you don't get any credit for winning them. You don't get any credit for winning them. And from that standpoint, I almost kind of agree with like USC, who got maligned badly for canceling its rivalry with Notre Dame. But the point in LA, it's kind of like that meme of the worst person makes a good point. The point coming in of LA was, listen, Notre Dame is guaranteed a playoff spot if they make the top 12. So playing them doesn't really help us, because we could be ranked higher than them and they'll still make the playoff over us. All we're doing is potentially helping our opponent while we play the game. I think that's a fair argument. And I think in the SEC, it works out the same way. Now, I'm going to say this. All of this could be avoided. All of this could have been avoided. We have said for years that the worst thing about the selection committee was based on its irrational decision-making about who it chooses to elevate and who it chooses not to. The selection committee is incentivizing softer schedules, and the selection committee is incentivizing the kind of things that a program like Alabama appears to be doing here, which is, if the game doesn't help us, why should we play it? It is a fair question to ask. I don't like Alabama, neither do you. In this particular case, they're making the same decision that I believe that Georgia's also in the midst of making, and I think it's probably the correct decision to make. For a long time, the SEC, far more than the Big Ten, has played a lot of these kinds of non-conference games. The SEC has mostly won them. Not all of them, but the majority of them. And in doing so, and Georgia is the best example, they have gotten zero credit for doing so. So why play them? I think that's a fair thing to ask. And I think that Alabama's probably making the right decision, even if we do get hurt in the process by not getting a chance to see the kinds of games we enjoy. Finally, to wrap it up here, speaking of the kinds of games we enjoy, today's a big day across the country, including here in the SEC. College baseball is back. That does include, of course, the Diamond Dogs. The best that I can tell as it relates to Georgia, they've done a really good job in the transfer portal. Now, I won't pretend to know who these guys are necessarily, except for a couple of them like the Ishikawa, who's the two-way player. Some of them are a little bit more famous to me than others. But the best I can tell is Georgia had a lot to replace to go along with what it has, and they've seemingly utilized the portal here pretty well. This sets up to be another really good Georgia season. The team they're playing this weekend, Wright State's also, I think, pretty good too. I think they're won a couple of games in the regional. I think they're pretty good. So it should be an interesting series here this weekend. Sunday, I guess, got canceled, doubleheader on Saturday because of the threat of rain. But across the SEC, college baseball is back. And I'll tell you this, and then we'll wrap up. Keep in mind that there is a very good chance that next year, if you're a baseball fan, keep in mind in 2027, there is a very good chance. If I could go on like, say, Polymarket or Kalshi, I would certainly put my prediction on not having a Major League Baseball season next year. I think there's a chance there is a work stoppage, and I think it could be a prolonged one, maybe even longer than it was in the dreaded year of 1994. So if you want baseball in your life, this may be your baseball. So if you've heard people like me, and I'm not an expert, I'm not following every pitch necessarily, but I do like following the sport overall. If you've heard people talk about how much fun college baseball is in Foley Field on these SEC weekends, it's about as good as you're ever going to get. It's very tight confines. You're close to the field. It's great competition. It's great energy. I cannot recommend it enough. I really can't. But if you've been on the fence about getting involved in college baseball, here's what I'm here to tell you. This may be the year to do it because it sets you up for next year when college baseball may be the only baseball you have, because I do believe that work stoppage is coming. So college baseball back today, fun sport to follow. This is one of those sports that doesn't have like millions and millions of fans, but it's got a dedicated few thousand, and in some cases more than that for some of these SEC teams, a dedicated few thousand in all the spots around the league, and it is just fun. It is some of the best stuff in college sports. It doesn't get nearly enough attention, but it is just some of the best sport there is. So plug in and check it out if you haven't. That would be my hearty recommendation. We'll make that your SEC through. Speaking of great Georgia fans, Georgia's had a lot of history of that over the years, and our Golden Shoe celebrates that today. So backstory here, I mentioned our R.S. Andrews cool down, which we do on video at the end of every show. The other day we were talking about how Sanford Stadium has changed over the years, and I was talking about how before I was born, the east end zone area was open, and you could see to the railroad tracks, and there were a collection of fans that would sit on the railroad tracks. There's a famous letter that the former Georgia great Irk Russell once wrote about the railroad people. It's just a great part of Georgia's overall lore. Well, a viewer to the show, Jeremy Smith, shared this with me on X, a great picture of the railroad people watching a game. Now, let me tell you this right now. That is amazing. Amazing photo, amazing era that predates me. But, man, they look like they're having a lot of fun. That is a great image. Jeremy Smith, great by you. We'll give you a golden shoe for that. And the spirit of this show exists for the railroad people. What they used to be, what they would be today, this is what this show exists for, the railroad people, as Irk Russell once made them famous. Jeremy Smith, great by you. We'll give you a golden shoe for that. Lousy, stinking Gators, when it comes to railroads for them, all they're doing is getting run over by the train because about 1,924 days. That's your Gator hater update. A long time since Florida's beaten Georgia. We love that. Hope you have a great weekend. We'll see you back here Monday. DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews cool down. R.S. Andrews, when you turn 2-4, your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time, doing the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust them on all of that today. I got something I got to do today, so we will not be able to go super long. I'm also dragging a little bit this week. I don't know. Around this time of year, I guess it usually happens for me. I am dragging. Now, you wouldn't be able to tell during the show because I'm a professional, but generally speaking, kind of dragging. So let's get some comments, and we'll see how everybody's doing. DT also made mention of the same reason the USC dropped Notre Dame. Yeah, I mean, look, this was also the long-time argument that Texas and Texas A&M used against each other, which was it got to the point where the other side thought they were helping the opposite side by playing the rivalry, and therefore it never got played. And that's annoying because we'd love to have seen that game, those of us who are college football fans. But you've also got to pay attention to the efficacy of that claim. How about this from our guy DT, who says he was on the tracks for the last game before they were wiped out for the Sanford expansion. He was 16, but the students were very good to me in sharing party favors. Well, there you go. DT, you've lived a very interesting life. So would this have been the 1980 season? Is that right? Would that have been, was 19, because I think we asked this the other day, we never quite got the answer, I don't think. Was 1980 the last year of the railroad people? I believe it might have been. Bill Camacho also looking forward to the Diamond Dogs. Good to hear that. Let's see what else. Senior Dog 54 says, when I was growing up in Southwest Georgia, you didn't want to schedule Alabama high school teams. They had 20-plus-year-olds playing. Rumor was they would pick up guys from work on their way to the games. Would not surprise me. Would not surprise me. I think there was a time in which maybe the record keeping wasn't quite as robust as it is now. Let's see what else. Yeah, a lot of stuff over at DawgNation.com. SEM Dog says the Pennsylvania pipeline goes all the way back to Charlie Trippey in the 1940s. Is Trippey from Pennsylvania? That's really cool. DeAndre Swift, obviously, from Pennsylvania, too. That's eastern part of the state. Western part of the state, a little bit different. It's amazing. Pennsylvania is a very interesting state. And people have, I'm far from the first person to point this out, but you know, you've got these two bookend cities, Pittsburgh to the west, Philadelphia to the east. And in the middle, you know, some of y'all remember this, there's a big baseball tournament in Cooperstown a couple of years ago. My son played in it. Long story short, we ended up having to drive, and you just drive like straight up through the middle part of Pennsylvania, and it is gorgeous. Gorgeous farmland, you know, completely different when you think about like the more developed urban parts of the state, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia. The middle part of the state, and like I said, I'm far from the first person to point this out. It is amazing how different it is. Some of the prettiest land you'll ever see, like really, really pretty. I wonder how Charlie Trippey in the 1940s would have ended up at Georgia from Pennsylvania. I'm sure that story's been told many times, but that's pretty cool.
Charlie told me he ended up at Georgia because there was a Coca-Cola rep up in his town doing work.
Is that right? So you interviewed him, previous employer.
Yeah, sat in his house in his basement a couple times, and he told me, because I asked the same question. I'm like, how did, you know, it's not like you're getting on the internet and they're calling you, but it was a Coca-Cola rep in that area that hooked him up.
That's really interesting. How sharp was he in his 90s? The reason why I asked this is because, and I really wanted to play this video. So a few days ago, Fran Tarkenton turned 86. Cody, he sounds as cogent as ever. It is amazing. I mean, it's almost like, wait, is this AI? Because I mean, like, it's not, but he's like 86 years old, and he's like the same Fran Tarkenton he's been for at least the last 20 years of, you know, talking about business and, you know, like just very, very animated in front of the camera. What was Mr. Trippey like in his 90s?
He was, yeah, same thing. Like I said, we did the interview in his basement. He's going up and down the stairs, and he was great. You know, last time I talked to him was pre-Rose Bowl. I think everybody did a story with him where he talked about riding the train out to Southern California. But I also had done a story with him when I was at WNEG when the Cardinals made the Super Bowl for the first time since his Chicago Cardinals had made the NFL championship game. So it was interesting.
So two things about this. A, when Mr. Trippi passed away right before the Tennessee game in 2022, in talking about his legacy, Cody, I said him being 100 years old is a part of his legacy. You know, as a number 1 overall draft pick, obviously a great player for Georgia. And I think the 46 team for Georgia is completely overlooked in terms of, you know, legacy and things like that. But the fact that he lived a healthy life to a century mark, to being 100, I mean, to me, that's a part of his biography as almost as much as anything else is.
Right. Just as impressive as being a 60-minute man and playing both ways.
I really do feel that.
Serving in the military and playing baseball. He did everything.
I also say this is that one time I saw, and look, if something's 100 years old, you have to understand, there's a very good chance I probably like it. I like things that are 100 years old. So I saw this really old advertisement for a local radio station in Gainesville where I lived, obviously grew up there. And apparently when he goes to the Chicago Cardinals, which is the oldest franchise in professional football, when he goes to the Chicago Cardinals, apparently the local Gainesville radio station was playing his games every Sunday. That, to give you an idea of how big of a deal that would have been, because this is an era in which college ball was more popular than pro football. The pro football popularity didn't come until kind of post-war, post-war. But Chicago Cardinal games were apparently on the radio locally where I grew up because, and the advertisement said it, it's like Chicago Cardinal football, and in parentheses, Charlie Trippi's team. They were playing those games locally. I just thought that was a great footnote. I
mean, some things don't change, right? We still are interested when dogs are involved.
That's exactly right. That was the old school version of the dogs in the NFL story. That was the old school version of that. Very good stuff, Cody. I appreciate that. Let's see. DT says Trippi was an early NIL recipient. Yeah, I'm not willing to stipulate that was true, but if it is true, I would say that the statute of limitations has long since passed. That was also, talking about age, that was also a situation back then where, like, I mean, you could go, and obviously we completely celebrate those who did, serve in our armed forces, but you could go serve and then come back and play 4 years of college. So this idea that, college has always been for college-age athletes, honestly, not as much as you might think. Because back in that era, those who would serve got a chance to come back, and, many of them played a long time after that. Randy Hall says, what are my plans for the weekend? Boy, I wish it was something really fun and exciting, but a lot of good stuff for my kids. They both got athletic endeavors this weekend, so we'll be chasing them around. Looking forward to seeing them do their things. That's about all I got going on these days, but I don't need much more than that. Let me go to YouTube, see how they're doing over there. Check it in here for a moment. Going very slow, but getting there eventually. We're going to also bounce out of here in a second, too. Goodness gracious. All right, here at YouTube. Wyatt Fielden said he got a chance to talk to Charlie Condon. I think this is Charlie Condon. On his way to the major leagues. Yeah, seems like he's done pretty well in minor leagues here thus far, and obviously has a chance to be a great player there in the Rockies organization. I'd love to be able to see that. By the way, Hofta Grid also, my daughter is involved in cheerleading. They do have the big, like, Atlanta's like overtaken with cheerleading this weekend. So everybody getting ready for that. I can promise you that's been a big topic around our house here the last couple of days for sure. There's just thousands of people. So if you are anywhere in and around downtown on Saturday or Sunday, I weep for you. I weep for you. But yeah, Hofta, you are right about that. We're all over that. Jonathan here with a funny comment in here. I'll probably leave that alone. Between the Hedges 99 also mentioned that tonight's night to shine. Yeah, we got some stuff going on with that too, locally. So we're excited about that. Let's see what else. Spencer Clark also enjoyed the picture from the railroad people. That's a great shot. Great scene. let's see what else. Spencer Clark also shouting out the Allegheny Mountains. Pretty part of Pennsylvania for sure. G. Gray says the college baseball doesn't make a profit. It's there for pure entertainment. And that's true to a certain extent. I mean, it does not make profit. I mean, and I'm not picking on Alabama. This is just, some numbers that happen to be shown this week. Because somehow somebody got a hold of their P&L. Like the baseball team lost like $5 million, which is pretty common. But there's also a sense in which, look, I'm telling you right now, baseball gets the short shrift. And there are a lot of Tennessee fans will tell you that if baseball wasn't parked behind women's basketball at Tennessee, they could have held on to what's-his-face that went to the San Francisco Giants. That within the various athletic programs, everybody knows that football's on top and men's basketball is obviously second. And then there's this like pecking order for what happens after that. And most programs have chosen to prioritize women's basketball over baseball. So therefore, I mean, there is a little bit of a ceiling about how popular baseball can be. So baseball does lose money. I don't dispute that. Do not dispute that at all. But some of that's also, a little bit of a lid put on its potential popularity, as Tennessee baseball fans have recently discovered. Let's see what else. Cedric Graham says he'd love to see the Power Four teams play a spring game against each other. I mean, there's been talk about this. I guess I don't take that all that seriously, but it is amazing that a lot of coaches speak openly about wanting to do this. Fran Brown wanted to take Syracuse to go play Colorado. NCAA stepped in and told them they couldn't do it. There's a lot of stuff this time of year that gets thrown around of, well, what if we had a 64-team playoff? And what if we did this? What if we did that? What if we played a spring game against a real opponent? That has been thrown around before. But in this particular case, some coaches tried to do this, but they were told no. The longest running, version of the made up off-season topic no longer is relevant. It used to be the old, maybe Auburn should come to the SEC East, which if you look at the geographical nature of the league, they really should have been the East. Stephen Venanzi, happy Mardi Gras, he says, checking in from New Orleans. How about that? I do love New Orleans. I like visiting New Orleans. New Orleans is one of those places, to be completely honest, I'm always glad when I get there, and then I'm always glad when I'm leaving. And that cycle has just repeated itself over and over again throughout my life. Stick D says, when does spring practice begin officially? I mean, it's typically right the middle of March, right? It's whenever spring break ends, they start right after that. Right in the middle of the month, typically speaking. Let us see what else. Between the Hedges, speaking of Night to Shine, says, the one day I'm a Tebow fan. Yeah, Tim Tebow has done a great thing with this. And I've had a chance a few times to be a part of like Night to Shine events. My kids are involved with that too. It really is a great thing. And what I think that Tebow deserves a lot of credit for is it's a great thing at scale, meaning that it's a good idea, it's well executed, and then if you go to the various places across our state, really across the country, that do the Night to Shine events, which is, in simple language, a prom-style event for those with special needs. And listen, John Stinchcomb was kind enough to invite me to one a couple of years ago. A lot of former Georgia players were there with that. Locally, we do some stuff with our local version of this, and it is just such an uplifting event because it just works. It just works. There are a lot of things in life that it just works. The idea is executed as it was planned to. And I do think that Tim Tebow deserves a lot of credit for that. And it's one of those things like you can't be a bigger Georgia fan than me. And on the football field, obviously, you hate Tim Tebow. Well, of course, that's the case. I found him as a football player very annoying. But as a dude, he's clearly doing a lot of really good stuff. And I'll say the same thing about Danny Werfel, too, who's also involved in a lot of stuff here locally in Atlanta, and people love him. He's probably not as well known for some of the stuff that he does, but really a genuine guy and very committed to a lot of things, doing it the right way. That, you do have to be honest about that, is that, they are our rivals, but, some of these guys, now listen, not all the Florida players have gone on to that kind of stuff, but those who do, we don't shy away from giving them credit. Let me go to Facebook here for a moment. And we'll hang out here for a couple more minutes. Those who do, we don't shy away from giving. Kent Holcomb has also been a railroad person before. There you go, Kent. That's great to hear. That's great to hear. Boy, a lot of good stories existing in our audience. Philip Wells says he thinks that stickball is more watchable than baseball because of the pitch clock stuff. I do somewhat agree. Like when I'm watching the games, like all the pitch clock stuff, major league, college, I mean, there's a part of me that wonders, like, who is this for? Because when Major League Baseball shortened the games, it's not like more people watch. First of all, more people watch Major League Baseball than I think even baseball realizes, given all the dumb stuff it's doing. They got baseball acts like it's a dying sport because somebody in the media told them they were, but the numbers don't actually bear that out. It's the strangest thing in the world to me. Strangest thing in the world. Of the major professional sports, Major League Baseball is still easily the second most popular, but somehow as a sport, they act like they're dying. I've never seen a sport that has lower self-esteem than Major League Baseball does. It really is baffling to me. The point is, so they do all this like pitch clock stuff and things like that, but it's not like the ratings went up by shortening the games. And listen, my son, who was, pretty young at the time when this came out a couple of years ago, was like, if I get a chance to go I remember he said this, I just like, bad boy, such a heartfelt thing. He's like, I don't want the game to be shorter. It's like if we get a chance to go to a game, I don't want it over in 2 hours. It's a treat to get to go to a major league game. So I don't necessarily agree with Philip on that some of the pitch clock game shortening stuff is, I just don't really know who's like, well, I guess if the game's going to be 10 minutes shorter, maybe I'll watch it. Major League Baseball perpetually seeking an audience that's just not going to watch the games, as opposed to serving the, sizable audience that it actually has. Red Leather's mentioning the Amish in Pennsylvania. So I've always heard about that. And we drove like straight through the gut of the state. I never saw the Amish. Like, where are the Amish? Because I never saw them. But I would like to see that. But I was actually thinking about that driving through Pennsylvania, because you could not have been in a more rural part of Pennsylvania than I was in, but we never saw the Amish. And I guess the point is they're not on the highway. I guess that's the point. But so Marshall Fleming says there's some Amish communities in Georgia. I did not know that. I think I could have probably done, other than air conditioning. I do really, really like air conditioning. Other than that, I think I could have been Amish. What is it? Is like a Luddite, somebody that doesn't like technology? I think I might be a Luddite. I think I might be one of those. All right, final comments. Marshall Fleming says people who never played baseball at a higher level don't understand everything is timing to the pitcher and the hitters, all timing. Yeah, that's exactly right. And like the most annoying thing about college baseball is, the pitcher has to get like acknowledgement to throw the pitch, and that comes after eye contact. So you've got this really weird thing where, and you watch college baseball, you'll watch this, where like the bat on his shoulders is looking down. If you can hear me, I'm away from the microphone. He's looking down like this, trying to avoid eye contact as long as possible. And there's this thing sometimes where like somebody will like, oh, he's staring into the opposing dugout. He's not, and this happens all the time. He's not staring into the opposing dugout. He's avoiding eye contact with the pitcher because he's trying to delay the pitcher's timing, exactly what Marshall's talking about. So this whole like pitch clock world we live in now has created this just asinine behavior where like the batter's not looking at the pitcher. It's just like, can we please just play baseball and like stop with all this histrionics? But you're 100% right. So Jerry Popham says that he got a chance to go watch a game on the tracks, but did not get to. I would have really liked that. You know, it's like if you could, if time travel is truly a thing, it's like some people would want to go back and like revisit great events in world history, or maybe try to alter world history. I just want to go back and like hang out with the track people, or just, I don't know, just go experience, a more quaint, version of, bygone times. Dean Ellie said he ate at an Amish restaurant in South Georgia and had the flattest Pepsi he's ever had. Well, that's your first mistake right there. With the Pepsi, that's your first mistake. But for some reason, that's very funny to me. I don't even 100% know why. All right. By the way, Spencer Clark mentions they may have NIL programs for Pop Warner soon. Yeah, so there's a law got passed in Georgia, and we'll leave after this. So there's a law now in Georgia where or at least it's been proposed. I think it's been passed in the House. The truth is, I don't even really know. Has the legislation session? I guess it started. I should probably know that. I don't even know. The point is like there's a law about high school players being able to like get NIL dollars, which A, I thought was already legal. B, I guess it's not. And I guess this opens the door for like the kid from so-and-so high school to be paid by the local business, which nobody's really going to do. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's a weird, I don't deny it's a weird thing, but it seems like, this just seems like one of those things that, like, what are we doing? On a number of fronts. Jonathan Aaron wonders if the pitch clock stuff is what's leading to injuries. Here's the thing. I don't think anybody really knows why there are so many pitching injuries. Everybody's got theories, and a lot of them are probably pretty true. But ultimately, I don't think people really know. But it is a problem. It is a problem. I mean, like in Major League Baseball, I mean, it's almost like if your favorite team's got the pitching prospect, as Braves are certainly well aware of, it's almost like you got to pretend like the guy doesn't even exist because there's a chance he won't. I don't think anybody really has a solution for this. I really don't. Randy Hall says, can you grow an Amish beard? Yeah, I don't know. It's very popular now. You see people with like the really long beards. That seems really uncomfortable to me. I probably could not do that. Probably could not do that. All right, we got to get ready to go. Brandon Griffin predicting the running game exploding this year, looking for Bo Walker to have a big season. Boy, I'd love that. I'd love that. That sounds good to me, too. All right, y'all have a great day. See you back here Monday. DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger. Also, make sure you check out R.S. Andrews online, rsandrews.com. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs, showing up on time, doing the work that's promised for the price is promised. What that means is, look, people are making all these claims and they can't really back them up. But R.S. Andrews, for a long time, terrific track record of doing just that. The R.S. stands for rapid service. So if you've got an issue with your electrical system or plumbing emergencies, boom, showing up right away. And weather's warm, at least it kind of has been a little bit the last couple of days. That means at some point in time, actual real live spring is going to be here. And when it does, you want your AC unit to be ready for it. So go ahead and get some new life out of your old unit. Some of y'all, you just be honest. You've had the same AC unit since you've had the house, and that was a long time ago. At a certain point in time, it's going to go kaput on you. So go ahead and find a way to get a little bit more life out of it. One more time, R.S. Andrews can show you how. Online, rsandrews.com. Great weekend. See you Monday. DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger. We'll talk to you then.